thoughts and opinions expressed in this podcast belong to the speakers and are not reflective of any organization. The content presented here is for general information purposes and should not be construed as advice.
Welcome to Animal Introspective, the podcast all about animal well-being and the well-being of the people who care for them. We're your hosts. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Grace.
We both work in the field of animal well-being, and we're putting this podcast together in order to discuss new and current concepts in well-being for all species. We're also going to be talking about the people who take care of animals and looking at those caretakers and their well-being, and that includes everything from your at-home pet owners to zookeepers, veterinarians, animal trainers, and so much more.
Yeah, and we'll be discussing the entire animal kingdom from the smallest invertebrates to large megafauna, and we'll be exploring the past, present, and future of animal welfare in human care. Okay, so for our first question is, how did we get here, Stephanie? How did you end up where you are?
Yeah, so I am the Animal Behavior and Wellbeing Program Leader for an AZA-accredited zoo currently. And I've been in that role for a few years and have spent most of my time working in the zoo field as a zookeeper, an apprentice zookeeper, and now in the welfare role. But prior to that, I started out just really loving animals, and I had a lot of animals growing up. I had horses growing up, and I showed them in 4-H and then in the breed circuits. I also worked as a volunteer for a local wildlife rehab for almost 15 years and did a lot of hands-on training with raptors and working with rehabbing small mammals and different kinds of birds, which was really developmental for me, I feel, to kind of establish this relationship with animals and to feel really passionate and fueled by taking care of animals. I always thought I wanted to be a veterinarian when I grew up and went to intern with a vet for a little while, and it wasn't exactly fitting with my passion in the way that I was looking for. And so I got an internship actually while I was in college at the local zoo and kind of developed my zoo profession from there. So I was an intern working with a lot of different animal species. And then I got an apprentice position and got to work with birds and all different types of mammals, reptiles, and so that really fueled my passion and was something that I wanted to stay involved with, and continued on as a zookeeper on a carnivore team, and then this new welfare role when that developed as well. But I really think for me, I like problem solving, which is why I'm so excited about this podcast that we're doing, because I like to learn new things and I like to talk about those new things. And I can remember even back from when I was like really little and playing the zoo computer games and things. I liked designing zoos fine, but I really loved the challenges of like the challenge levels where it would give you a scenario and you would try to go in and make changes to improve things. And I think that has really been something that's correlated with my current role and being able to help identify any animal welfare areas where we could use improvement and then suggest changes and see those things get implemented. So it's been a really great time for me, and I've really enjoyed my career path. So what about you? How did you get into this field and where did you start out?
Yeah, so I've worked as an animal welfare specialist alongside you at an AZA zoo. I've also done the same thing at a large multi-species animal sanctuary. But before that, like you, I also wanted to be a veterinarian for a really long time. I went to college to finish all of my vet school prerequisites. I did a pre-vet major. I did a lot of extracurriculars to make sure that my resume was competitive to apply to vet school. I worked as a veterinary assistant at an overnight ER animal hospital for almost 2 years. But then when it came to be my senior year or my senior year, whenever it was, I actually felt like I wasn't excited to apply to vet school. There's something about it that I just wasn't really interested in anymore, and I wasn't quite sure why. But while all of this was happening, I got an internship at the local zoo with you, working in your animal welfare department. And it was great. I had so much fun. We did so many projects looking at animal behavior and animal welfare. And it was my first time really diving into that world. And I was so inspired by it. And then through that opportunity, I was offered a paid job at the zoo to work in your department. And working at the zoo made me discover that I really liked project-based work and to be creative. And I learned that I liked it so much more than working at a traditional animal clinic where you're taking care of people's pets. Of course, working in the veterinary field, you need to be very creative, and there are projects to be had in the veterinary world. But in the clinic setting, it is a little bit more case-based, and it can be a little bit more repetitive sometimes. So that's why I really enjoyed working in a zoo. So for you, I'm always so curious, what makes someone an animal person? So for you, Stephanie, was there like a defining moment in your life where you were like, that's it, I'm going to work with animals?
That's a great question. No, I don't really think so, because I think I've always felt like that. And I remember being really little and having a lot of stuffed animals and a little vet kit that was like a toy kit with all the instruments that you could pretend to do checkups on toys and things. And I had that from when I was really little and would do that all the time. And I do remember, I think I was about 5 years old, and for Christmas, my grandma got me ballet lessons. And I just remember being so sad and upset, and I did not want to do ballet, and I cried and cried until she said she would get me horseback riding lessons instead. So I kind of feel like I just always wanted to be with animals and work with animals, and I can't really remember a time when I ever didn't want to do that.
Yeah, you just really didn't want to dance.
I just did not want to dance.
No, not at all.
Not at all. What about you? Did you have kind of a turning point for animal?
I would say I do kind of have a little bit of a ridiculous origin story, because picture it, the year is 2010. I'm at the Philadelphia Zoo with my family, and there was this zoo crew teen at a station somewhere in the zoo. And this was when like the palm oil messaging was really gaining in popularity, of course, meaning that spreading the word about how palm oil plantations contributes to rainforest destruction, impacting the populations of orangutans and many other species. And there was this little cart and two teens, and they had like a Lego rainforest structure in front of them. And then they told me all about how palm oil was bad and all of these things. And I was like, wow, I really soaked it all in. And it's funny looking back, because it was probably just like two 14-year-old kids just waiting for their moms to pick them up from their zoo crew shift. But it like honestly changed my life. It formulated my brain, because at that time I was only like 10 years old. So I went back to school and I wrote a whole essay about how palm oil is bad and you shouldn't purchase it. And that's why you shouldn't purchase shampoo that has palm oil ingredients in it. And I turned it into my teacher, and she really didn't like it. She didn't understand it. So I would like to think that I was way ahead of my time. But since then, I was just really into the environment. So I think my passion for the environment kind of led me onto the road of animal care, because they're so interconnected. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like, it was more environmentally focused, leading to the animals instead of maybe necessarily direct animal focus from the beginning.
Yeah, and I guess it's a testament to how educational programs in public animal spaces like at a zoo really are like so impactful, because that, like I said, it literally just influenced me so much that I honestly, like, I wonder like who I would be today if I didn't necessarily have that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was kind of our backstory. But what do you think are the reasons why people in general choose to go into the animal care fields over other jobs?
Yeah, I feel like probably there's a lot of characteristics that make somebody more likely to go into animal care. And I know I saw some research articles that were talking about if there was any kind of correlation between having an increased empathy capability and being an animal caretaker or being involved with animal care. So where they're actually thinking that people who are more empathic and more able to connect with the emotional feelings of others are able to do that not only with other people but also with animals, and then that leads to them wanting to help those animals and be involved with those animals and take care of them as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other day you were talking to me about empathic fatigue. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, it's this new phrase that I'd never heard of before. I don't know how new it actually is, but it was new to me, and I was really excited to learn about it because we talk a lot about compassion fatigue and how big of an impact that plays on animal caretakers. But this phrase that I just learned about was empathic fatigue, and what empathic fatigue is that when you experience empathy, usually there's not anything that you do about the empathy. So empathy is just connecting with how someone feels and essentially feeling that yourself. So you're able to relate to them because you can feel what that would feel like and understand what they're going through. But it's not necessarily taking action in order to change that. And so that is something that we see a lot in the field, not that people aren't taking that action, but that they might not be in the capacity to actually do anything about it. So you might be working somewhere or involved with animals that you want to help improve their lives, but because of the situation or because of the role you have in that profession, you're not actually able to enact a lot of change. And so that can cause this empathic fatigue, this buildup of feeling how they're feeling, but not able to do anything about it. So I do think that that's a new thing that we're learning about that's coming into this field, because compassion fatigue is definitely heavily in there, but with compassion, there's a little bit more direct action and the ability to do something with that.
Yeah, and I know personally, like, I've definitely experienced some compassion fatigue, and I've also experienced working in an environment where many of my coworkers are really experiencing compassion fatigue as well as empathic fatigue as well. I know, especially with my experience working in a veterinary hospital, that's just, it was very rampant where I was working, and partly because I believe veterinary staff are often overworked and underpaid. And as we know, that leads to a slew of other problems. So I think that can really impact a person's burnout in their work. Like, I know for me, I only worked at a veterinary clinic for about 2 years, and that was my first clinic job. And even at those 2 years, I would walk into work just already kind of feeling exhausted and anxious about the upcoming 12-hour shift. And being so young, I am kind of, not scared, but I am kind of worried that I may get burnt out in the animal welfare space because I'm still young. I'm quite new to the field. But when sometimes you're in something so intensely, it's hard to not get wrapped up in it and be affected by these sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that is such a big risk and a big factor for a lot of people going into animal care careers, because it is more of a passion feeling driven field. I don't think that it has quite caught up.
It's not money driven.
It's not. That's what I was gonna say. It's
Yeah.
not caught up with a lot of the other industries that are paying higher wages. And so I think that it's easy for people who have big hearts and who are very compassionate and very empathic and very driven to help go into it. But then those people also might be more likely to be hurt by it, right? They're more likely to almost be taken advantage of because they are trying so hard to help. And that can really cause some issues for everyone.
Yeah, I know. I was, this was a while ago, but I was speaking to a recently graduated veterinarian, and she said the number one thing that she didn't quite expect post graduation was that being a veterinarian wasn't as immediately rewarding as she always envisioned it to be. So she talked to me a little bit about how she's trying to find the reward in herself instead of trying to find that external validation and finding that reward in other people and clients and the pets and the staff members that you work with. She was trying to more find it from within and thinking about how you can reward yourself in your own work within animal care.
I have found for myself that in the zoo field, I really like having new challenges and experiencing new things and learning new things. And when I am looking at it from that lens, it's easier for me to not feel burnt out because in the welfare field, like you said, it's a lot of experiencing troubling cases and having to work through different scenarios. And so I try to look at each one individually, if that makes sense, so that it's kind of like a fresh slate for each one and it's its own individual challenge and experience. And that has helped me to kind of move on from case to case so that it isn't so overwhelming and it doesn't kind of bog me down quite as much.
Yeah. You definitely need to be excited about challenge because working with animals, it's not an easy profession. I think there's for like the average person in the public, I feel like there's a sense that working with animals is this lovely time where you're cuddling with puppies and you're having amazing experiences and making friends and having a laugh and having a good time. But a lot of the times that is not the case at all. It's really difficult to work in animal care because it can be very it's physically demanding and it's also very mentally demanding. It can be very intellectual. So I think that's a misunderstanding that maybe the general public hasn't exactly tapped into yet. And maybe that's also some of the frustration of people working in the field, I think, is that conflict between them and their colleagues and the general public, not essentially understanding what they do or contribute to society, and maybe they don't feel necessarily appreciated by society.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I do think too, you know, especially with zoos and sanctuaries and other places that are kind of in public scrutiny, I think that the general kind of atmosphere is to keep things as confidential and private as possible in order to protect animals and staff. But I do think that might be maybe an outcome of that is a little bit of the public not knowing what all goes into it and thinking that it is just people coming in and hanging out with animals and, you know, doing tricks and feeding them and scooping poop, and that's what they do all day. So I could definitely see that as kind of a barrier that prevents kind of the good communication that we need in order for those animal caretakers to feel really supported and valued.
I think the communities within animal care can become very insular in a way, even between different factions. Like a lot of the times zoos may not be very communicative with sanctuaries and vice versa. Where, you know, even in veterinary staff that work in private practices may not be as communicative with animal shelters, and there can be rifts there as well. So I think that's a really interesting point that you made where maybe the solution is that there is a little bit more communication and there's a little bit more sharing between everything. Something that I've personally experienced that I know probably pretty everyone that works in the veterinary field has experienced right now is that there can be a lot of public pushback and client complaints about how expensive veterinary care can be, because I think there's still this general sense that veterinary care should be cheap when in actuality it's just as involved as human medicine. And as we know, human medicine is not cheap.
I think the zoo field has been undergoing kind of a similar change as well, with raising admission prices or trying to come up with new creative events in order to continue to draw new guests and existing guests, getting people to return to the zoo, because it is so important to have revenue, right? If we don't have good revenue streams into the zoo, then we're not going to be able to take care of the animals as well as we need to and want to. And so with the kind of cost of living changes and everything else that's going on, some of the zoos are having to increase their admission price to get in, and some people are not happy about that because they want it to be the same. And of course we want it to be accessible to everybody and make it as easy for all different people to come to the zoo, but it is also a challenge when you have to make sure that every animal is cared for to the best of your ability as well.
So on the topic of the challenges of working in animal care, let's talk about the barriers to entry of people wanting to come into the field of animal care. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's so many different ways that it can be a real challenge to get into this field, because there's, schooling requirements for a lot of different careers in the industry. Zookeeping, a lot of zoos require you to have a bachelor's degree or an associate's at the very least. Veterinary school, of course, is very expensive and it takes a lot of time to do it. Your other behavior and training courses, whether you get a degree or not, it's all still very expensive. So there's a lot that you have to invest to get into the field. And I feel like also there are barriers in just kind of knowledge about the field as well, right? A lot of people growing up don't have access to zoos or natural spaces or wild spaces where they can get out in nature and be able to experience that and learn different conservation methods or learn more about animals or plants and kind of build a passion for that, even if they may be sort of predisposed to want to go that route.
Yes, and not only that, but for example, to work at a zoo, to be a zookeeper, a lot of the first steps is to have a professional internship at a zoo. But many of those internships are unpaid, and many people do not have the privilege to pursue an unpaid internship that will take up a lot of their week's schedule, while also trying to have a full-time job where they're able to make money to live and survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also that a lot of zoos require you to have paid time in order to be hired in. So they don't want just an unpaid internship, but they want you to be a paid employee somewhere. But it's really hard to get a paid employee job when you haven't ever been a paid employee before. So it's really challenging with that. And because the jobs are so limited and so competitive, a lot of times you have to look for an opening all across the country and be able to move at a moment's notice to a new location, which is a lot of times not very realistic for people who might have families or might not be able to financially move their whole lives across the country.
But I feel like the good news is that a lot of places are heading in the right direction by making things a little bit better, more accessible within the industry, having better quality of life for the people that work in these industries. While we were talking about zookeeping, I know that the AZA has a lot of new diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that are helping to solve the issues of the barriers for entry into the field. So that's great, and I'm hoping that we have a bright future.
Yeah, and I feel like the more we talk about it, then the more the change will continue to happen.
Yeah. And that's why we're here, to talk about the important stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So to wrap things up, at the end of each episode, we're going to do a little segment where we talk about something that we're curious about in the present moment. So something that we're looking into or researching that's involving animals or people or kind of any topic, really, that we're fascinated about right now.
Yeah, Stephanie, so what are you curious about?
Right now, I've been super interested in reptiles and how they perceive the world. So I know that we do know some things about the way that they see and smell and can sense heat, but I've been very fascinated about snakes specifically and learning more about how they can perceive the world and trying to figure out if there's a way that we can use that to educate people on kind of the way that they're interacting with them and what those animals are actually seeing during those interactions. What about you, Grace? What are you curious about right now?
Yeah, right now I've been really interested in land restoration, which is really something that I don't know much about, but I live right next to one of the rivers that runs through our city, and there's a big movement to help restore it into a certified wildlife refuge. I forget even the term that they're trying to use, but it's very interesting, and it's even cooler that I live right there, so it feels like it's really involved in the community. So that's something that I'm interested in, is how land restoration really restores communities and cities.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And with that, that's the end of our first episode. I hope you join us next time as we talk about the wonderful world of animal welfare.